Shari Biery is a national board certified health and wellness coach, speaker, and author of the best selling book, It's Your Turn. After 2 decades as a military spouse, supporting her husband's Navy career and family, Shari realized she spent years putting herself last. That awakening led her to create the CALM method, a powerful framework that helps women move from burnout to balance by reconnecting with who they are, not just what they do. Through her coaching and programs at Alive with Purpose, Health, and Life Coaching, she guides midlife women to reclaim their energy, identity, and joy, and finally say, "It's my turn." So, Shari, welcome to More Than a Milspouse. Now, before we get started today, I just have to ask, how did you end up with a name like Shari Biery? Because it's so fun.
Yeah, my husband and I started dating in high school. We actually, funny story, we worked at McDonald's together. And when he asked me out on the first date, I thought, there is no way I am marrying this man because I will become Shari Biery. And it's just funny how what love will do, right?
Exactly. So, you started dating in high school. So that was before military life was ever discussed. How did that
Yeah.
come about?
Yeah, actually, I became a respiratory therapist. I still keep my license current in the state of Florida now, but we both grew up in Ohio, kind of a small rural farming community, and met each other at the local McDonald's. And then I went to respiratory school. And then I always say he followed me to the University of Toledo and got his pharmacy degree. His dad and his grandfather were both osteopathic physicians, and he really felt kind of I think I need to do more. And when we had that discussion, this was back in the late 90s or mid 90s, it was like, what do we want to do? Like, how do we pay for medical school? But there was also this component of like wanting to serve his country. And both of our grandfathers were in World War II. Our dad served in Vietnam. And it never really came up until we started talking about what do we want and what does that look like. So he had applied for a Navy Health Promotion Scholarship. And that's kind of how we ended up thinking, first of all, that we were just going to be in, he's going through medical school. And then at the end of that period, he gave his service to the Navy and the country. And we'd be like, oh, 5 years. Okay, no big deal. Well, we were having a lot of fun. We were meeting a lot of great people along the way. And two little kids from kind of a small county, small country area, being able to see the world, it just opened our eyes. And so we always said we would make it work until it didn't work for our family. And so after we had kids, we just kind of evaluated it. And then fast forward 10 moves, as you know, military life brings you all over, but 20 years. And it was like, okay, where do we go from here? And it was time for retirement. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we ended up. He ended up in the Navy. And for so many military spouses, we serve alongside, really. I mean, we all know this as mil spouses. They couldn't do what they do without us or the family.
Yeah, but you've talked a lot about how you reached this point where you realized that you were putting yourself last. Can
Mm.
you talk a little bit about your journey as a military spouse? What some of the challenges you faced, and what was the point that you realized, hey, I'm putting myself last?
Yeah, it was being that respiratory therapist. I thought, oh, hospitals, they're all over. I'll have no problem getting a job. And for a while, getting stationed at different through his training and stuff, we were back and forth from East Coast to West Coast. And it was fairly okay. We were in Hawaii for some time. I was able to work, we call it PRN or as a needed basis as a therapist. And then it got more serious. We moved to Guam, and it was like, well, first of all, corpsmen do the duties of a respiratory therapist at the Naval Hospital there or the medical center. And there's one little hospital on Guam. And as you can imagine, in small communities, there's not much turnover. So working in my field was not necessarily possible, but there was something else that was so great of a need as I started to get involved in the military spouse community. There was just such a great need for help everywhere. So I jumped into volunteer work through Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, through volunteering at the school, through the church for single sailor night when we would cook meals, just a variety of different ways. And so I really thought, this is a way I can give back. And for that time, it was great. And then we bounced back and forth. We went to San Diego. There was always constant moving, as there is with Milspouse. And we weren't only in San Diego for 10 months. And so it was really hard to and we had two young kids, elementary school and preschool, and it was hard to find childcare, as many of us struggle when we're in the military. And so being able to bounce back and forth like that, we were stationed in Okinawa, again, not able to work in my field. So I threw myself into volunteer work. Then we came back to Annapolis and I went into the Fleet and Family Center. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to try to get some help with my resume. I don't know if I can go back and work in respiratory because just not having available childcare, my husband was in and out a lot. And so I thought, let me see what I can do here. And the recruiter at the time, or the person at the Fleet and Family Service Center, the specialist who was helping me with my resume, said, have you ever thought about working in the federal government? And I thought, doing what? And what I ended up doing was transferring a lot of my skills that I had done through volunteer work and went and worked. I started out as more or less like an administrative assistant in the computer science department. I got good at the defense travel system and moved up. And then I ended up in the research office and worked with grants and purchasing and proving travel. I became a financial analyst. And then fast forward, we moved to Pensacola and again, moving again. But through my connections, what I had made at the academy, I had actually got connected with an organization, a nonprofit there, and I worked there for a little while. But then retirement came. We started talking about what is life after military. But at the same time, I was going through this constant taking care of everybody else but myself. It was my mid 40s. I was starting to hit perimenopause and my body was giving me all kinds of signals. So at John's retirement ceremony, I tell this story in the book. He handed me the American flag and he said, "It's your turn." And I have to give some context. I always have to say this now. I'm reminded of it because outside the military community, somebody said, "Does that mean you signed up for military service?" And
That's funny.
It was so funny. I'd never thought about that. In that moment, I realized I was thinking I needed permission. I needed to give permission to myself. And that's when I said, I have to take better care of myself. I have put myself off too long. And I'm ignoring all of these whispers because now my body is screaming at me and I just don't know what's going on. So that led me on a path of burnout and exhaustion and working my way back, become a national board certified health and wellness coach after my own kind of discovery of it and realizing it's not just the food you eat, the movement, it's our thoughts that we have about giving ourselves permission. It's taking the time to reduce our stress, lifestyle. It's a lot of different things. So that's a very long explanation, but I hope it gives some context because I think so many military spouses are in this boat.
It's a long explanation, but it really does bring it full circle because when I go back to when we lived in Guam, I am very familiar with that Navy hospital because that ER is where I was diagnosed with shingles in my mid 30s. And I was like, there's a problem here. I am not dealing with my stress in a way that's helpful if I'm ending up in the ER with shingles, which is really what led me on this journey of figuring out like, what do I do with my stress? Like, how do we handle
Mm.
this? As military spouses, we're going to have these situations that give us a lot of stress. And like what I'm doing right now is not working and I need a better way. So I love that your story really started there of saying, okay, I'm not able to pursue the career that I planned for myself. And how is this going to shift? And how you've been on this journey to really start to figure out, like, okay, how do I take care of myself? Now, I do want to ask because after volunteering and deciding, okay, I'm going to go back and earn a paycheck, if you are going back into the workforce as an admin assistant, did how did that feel to you? Did it feel like you were taking a step backwards in your career? And how did you navigate that season?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff after, kind of sitting down through all this and writing the book. That was never on my radar, but I didn't realize how cathartic that was for me because I can look at it now and I see there was so much grief in there of not being able to do something that I was very passionate about and I love to do. And so, in some ways, yes, there was kind of two things kind of happening tandem. My kids were in a season of needing me a lot more, or needing at least, as we know, that one parent who's stable, who's always there, who's geographically there a lot. And so that was kind of, this is where I was like, you know what? This actually works for our family right now. At the same time, I could see as I was doing the job, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can run circles around some of these positions that I was in because of my skills as not only a respiratory therapist, but mostly as a military spouse. Handling different things, being able to learn things. And I always say the canvas of which I created my strengths was that chaos in all of that. And I can look back at it now, but there was a lot of grief in it. There's a lot of resentment when John handed me that flag. I was feeling like, why is it me that gave all this up in a lot of ways? But when I looked at it, it was really the resentment was coming from I was watching other people in my life do fun things or take care of themselves or take the time to go to the gym or take the time to have coffee with friends. And I was feeling very resentful because I wasn't able to do some of the things that I had in my initial career. And I realize now, after looking back, the resentment was brewing because I just was at a tea kettle moment, that teapot moment when you're ready to blow. And you're like, my nervous system was working overtime to keep up with it.
Yeah. So take us back to this moment where you're realizing, okay, you've been given permission. It's my turn now. And how did you begin that journey? Because you're at this place where your nervous system is out of whack. You feel like your body is screaming at you. Talk us through that season.
Yeah. I just, I started to say, what do I get to do for myself today? And it really just became this like about a couple weeks after, John's retirement ceremony, I was in my office and I wrote on a sticky note, today is the day I start taking care of me first. And I put it as a reminder on my day planner. I still keep a paper one. And I would put that every time the week flipped over, I would put that in there just as a reminder that I get to do something for myself. So there's a lot of mindset and a shift in thinking that had to happen. And that was slow. It was just like one thing after another. But the other thing was, I knew I really needed to have my body checked over and see what I might have been going to my annual checkups and stuff like that. But when I really think about it, and again, another story I tell in the book was, 5 years earlier, going into my provider's office and her coming in, I was having all kinds of symptoms of perimenopause. I was night sweats, heart racing, unable to sleep, being able to feel anxious all the time, not in the sense of like anxiety, but just not keeping up, the exhaustion that set in. And I remember my provider at that time had said, "How's your stress?" And my whole thing was I dismissed it all. My husband was back from deployment. Our kids were in school. We weren't moving that year. And, my job had kind of settled in a little bit. No, I don't have any stress. But in the background, I had all this stress. And then fast forward to that time right after John's retirement, I went in to see my medical provider. And he said, "Yeah, you're probably going through perimenopause," handed me an antidepressant, patted me on my back, and said, "Welcome to midlife." And that made me so upset. I lost it. I went in the car. I cried. I said, "There's got to be a better way." I'm in the medical field. My husband's in the medical field. And I went searching for answers. This was back in 2018. Now there's a lot in perimenopause and menopause that's talked about, but we still have a lot of work to do. And, finding the right provider made all the difference. I actually found somebody, unfortunately, out of the system. I did have to pay out of pocket for some, but it was what I needed at the time. And since then, some things have gotten better in that regard. But I knew part of this whole thing was resting, giving myself permission, changing some of the ways I was thinking about eating consistently, movement, and then having people on my yes team. And that included a provider who I felt comfortable talking with.
Mm. So you said that writing a book was never on your radar. How did it come to be? And tell us a little bit about what you put into this book.
Oh my gosh, it wasn't on my radar at all. But after I'd started coaching for a while, I actually was listening to a speaker who came into one of the coaching groups I had belonged to for being coached myself. And she said something that really stuck with me. She said, "Is there a story or do you have something that you could share that you've learned to help others?" And I just thought, oh my gosh, being a military spouse, I think we learn a lot of lessons. But I started thinking about the book that I was looking for in that time when I was in that spin and going, I couldn't find a book to help me, or I couldn't find, my bedside table was growing with self-help books, but they all seemed to not address a lot of the things that I was going through. And so I just started on the journey that way of what would that look like? And so I got involved in a writing group. I thought it was going to be a really quick process. And 3 years after, that was just my timetable. I had great editors. I had a good framework of my book, and writing, became very, like, as I mentioned, cathartic for me. But at the same time, they helped me slow down and write and dig a little bit deeper. So that really brought kind of this idea of, could I tell someone else it's okay to take your turn? So it's really become this anthem of kind of a permission slip, if you will, of giving yourself permission to take your turn, to take care of your health, to take care of your well-being, and just listen to your body and have that mindset that you get to say yes to yourself every day.
I think it's so important because I hear this from spouses a lot. It's this idea of feeling guilty about taking care of yourself and putting yourself first. So, can you speak a little bit to why we get into this feeling of guilt and what we can do about it?
Yeah, guilt comes up so easy. If you really look at this is women in general. We are such givers and we really want to take care of other people. And so when we're giving all the time like that, and for me, the identity shift that happened after kind of retirement, I thought about this. I'm like, my worthiness always has been tied to a paycheck, or at least it was before military life. And as I was building that, some areas I wasn't able to work in my field. And so my worthiness came from giving to others and doing things. That's kind of a love language, right? For many women. And then we get to this point where it's like, I feel guilty. And the thing is this is a societal shift too that needs to happen, where we see women giving so much of themselves. And at times we feel that guilt when we're like, oh, I should be here versus there. And what I really have come to learn, and watching clients do this too, is giving themselves permission to rest or take care of themselves first. You actually show up better for everybody around you. When we're able to fill our cup first, or take our oxygen mask and put it on, just think of the ripple that happens. And we got to look at our language too. We get a lot of our beliefs from how we grew up. So if we see women in our lives kind of giving to everybody else and sacrificing themselves, and a lot of times this wasn't talked about, it still isn't, about like, I'm really struggling, or I'm not feeling good in my body, or, I can't let someone down to not bring cookies to the cookie fair, whatever it is. It's like looking back at boundaries and where do we need to reestablish those.
It's so important because I know this, because I experienced this in my own life of getting to that point where I felt like I'm not recognizing that I wasn't showing up as the spouse that I wanted to be, as the mom that I wanted to be, as the friend that I wanted to be, because I wasn't taking care of myself. But the more that I took time to take care of me and to create that space for rest and to notice my thoughts and began to reframe them, the more I was able to show up for the people that I care about in my life. And it's this thing that we've got to get around the shift of like, there is something good that benefits everyone around us and we take care of ourselves. Would you just talk for a moment about the coaching journey and what coaching did for you, and kind of how you chose to become a coach for other people?
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of going on to that whole guilt thing, just speaking to that a little bit. I used to say and I said this in the book, I had a helium hand. It was the hand that raised up for everybody else but myself. And that guilt just kept showing up. And this was something in coaching that I realized, going through the health and wellness coaching journey. So I went through a certification program for health coaches first. Then I went through a certification for life coaching, which are two totally different, but honestly, they marry up very beautifully when we work with them together. And then I went on and did a further certification with the National Board of Health and Wellness Coach. Now they have a little higher credentials within the medical community too. They're working with the American Medical Association and getting reimbursement for CPT codes, which is insurance model of getting some sort of reimbursement. They've worked with the Veterans Association or administration and have the whole health program, which they work tandem one another. So coaching, I realized like this answered so many things. I've always been like a good cheerleader. I'm ready to help somebody out. But what I realized in all of this coaching in myself, I had a lot of thoughts. And I call them in the book, I call them the gremlins. And it's those things that tell us we don't have time, we don't have permission, we don't have the money. And just really looking at those to say, where are those coming from? And it's just pattern. When we start looking at our language and our behaviors, it's really fascinating to look at that. And so coaching really has become kind of that conversation with women that I coach is, who do you want to be? And what do you want in your life? And that's kind of how the CALM method got created, because it was like we all see the things sometimes that slow us down, but sometimes we don't. And that's where coaching is like, a coach said to me one time, you can't read the medicine bottle from the inside. And I thought that was such a good perspective, because we know we're in our own stuff And when we can step back from it and somebody else very compassionately and kindly can reflect back what we're saying, what we want, and what's slowing us down, there's a lot of ahas in that moment too.
Yeah, it's been so powerful in my life. So, can you talk a little bit about the calm method that you created and how it's been able to help people?
Yeah. So I really, like, I was my first client in this really because I noticed these were the things that kept coming up consistently. And the word that so many of the women that I have conversations with are, I want more calm. I want more peace in my life. And so as I was working on this, I thought calm, really. So I created this acronym calm and I break it down in the book, but it's clarity for who you want to be and what you want in your life. The A is awareness to what is slowing you down. It's talking about those gremlins and getting clear at what is the gremlin that's slowing you down and how can we remove that or reestablish some of these boundaries in our lives. And then the L is learning to listen to your body. Sometimes when we think, oh, my body needs food and it needs movement, but it also, as we talked, we need rest. We need good sleep. Sleep is the foundation for everything. You need a good medical provider and yours, I call it your yes team, your support team. So I always say you have your health and wellness bus and you can open that door and let the people you want on that bus. So it might be a personal trainer, or it might be a friend who's cheering you on. It could be your medical provider. It could be your yoga instructor. It could be your spiritual advisor. There's many people who can come on that bus. But I also say you can kick people off that bus too. Because so much of the time, especially with our medical care and our system, we sometimes think that we don't have any control, but we do. We have a control over the choices of who we go to, who we see, and the people that we put in our lives. And then the M is mindset to say yes to yourself every day. And one of the key points that I point out in that part is rest is a possibility generating activity. When we rest, we see things differently. We see opportunities. We can just tune in, and it makes things so much better when we fill our cup and then more joy and all these things start showing up for us that we didn't think was possible.
That's so powerful because I know we all conceptually know that we need sleep, we need rest because it helps us, but it becomes one of those things that is just on our to do list that often gets pushed to the bottom of the to do list. But to say that it is a possibility generator, to say, like, guess what's possible when I take the time to listen to and care for my body? That's really, really powerful. Now, you've created this quiz for people to take. Can you talk a little bit about the quiz you've created?
Yeah. So I realized, and this part, this has been something really fun. It's 10 questions. It's very fun to take. I've tried to make it very relatable to what goes on, especially, I mean, in women's lives, any woman can take this, but especially in midlife, there seems to be this clash of a lot of things going on at the same time. So you can be one of three types. I've kind of created these three archetypes, if you will. The giver is somebody who's always given to everybody else, but she's ready to give to herself. She's ready to replenish her energy. And sometimes that looks like reestablishing boundaries and letting go of some of that guilt. And then the reclaimer is that woman who has maybe been not paying attention to her body and she's ready to do something different when it comes to her health. Her body's giving her all these signals. Maybe it's brain fog, maybe it's night sweats, maybe it's just exhaustion. And you're like, what's going on? Or I just am not as quick thinking. I just don't feel like I have the energy. And that's the reclaimer gets to say, I get to take care of myself, but I get to get the support I need to. So, what does that look like? And then the seeker is because I work with so many midlife women, there's usually this It's that empty nesting that happens. In military spouses' lives, it's maybe retirement, or your spouse or significant other has left service. And now you're going, I was a military spouse. Am I still a military spouse? Or what's the possibility? So the seeker is craving more inspiration, more purpose, and maybe joy in her life after being on autopilot for so many things. So one of those three archetypes is, and I always say, we have a little bit of each in us, and there may be one thing at one certain period in our lives where we're a little bit feeling a little more pull to take more focus in that area. So as you take the quiz, you'll get your kind of results, if you will, and then I give you some resources through it and just some of the things that I've pulled out in my coaching toolbox that my clients work with too.
So let us know, where can we go to take the quiz and see all of the resources that you have available?
Yeah, so you can go to sharibiery.com is my website. The book is itsyourturnbook.com. So if you can remember one or the other, it's all tied into the same website. And then what is your spark type is the quiz there. And so it's up in the banner.
We will link all of that in the show notes. I would love for you just to take a moment. If there's a word that you want to give to the military spouse who is struggling, who is feeling lost or feeling resentful, or is noticing that she has not been taking care of herself, what would you like to say to her?
I would say you are worthy. Worthy is the word, because you have to look at yourself as an individual, even though you've had all these identities and these tied to the roles, is you do get to take care of yourself. You get to do what makes you happy. And it really is the first step, is doing one thing for yourself. So worthy, 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 worthy.
So good. Thank you so much, Shari, for joining us and sharing your wisdom and helping us remember that it's okay to take care of ourselves and to say, it's my turn.